Hey everybody, this is Bo Sanders, and I hope you will stick around for the end of this video because I have a constructive suggestion, three-prong approach that I think might help us have a more fruitful conversation. Sometimes patient listening and actual genuine dialogue can really pay off. I have, over the past several months, been interacting with some conservative and evangelical and charismatic Christians who are very concerned about critical race theory and even opposed to it in a passionate way. So I'm writing in critical race, my academic work, and I'm a Christian minister who employs critical race research in my ministry. So it's been really strange to me to see this level of outrage. I've been perplexed at the defensiveness and even the really reactionary stuff that is coming out from my fellow Christians. So I've asked lots of questions, and I have found some patterns that have emerged that have helped me figure out that the problem seems to be stemming from a two-headed monster. First, they're not actually reading critical race. They're reading critiques of critical race from non-practitioners, such as famous pastors and authors in other fields. Secondly, they're not reading Christian authors who are dealing with race. They're reading only D'Angelo's White Fragility and Kendi's How to Be Anti-Racist or critiques of them. So this makes so much more sense why they are so upset. They're not actually reading or listening to critical race or Christians who are dealing with race. Look, I said before, if somebody doesn't want to read academic approaches to critical race work, I totally get that. But they're not even reading accessible, popular level stuff like Randy Woodley, Living in Color, Lisa Sharon Harper, Soong-Chan Rah, Christina Cleveland, Michael Eric Dyson, Drew Hart, Willie Jennings. This is the problem of not reading on race, but only listening to criticism of it. There are actually four different types that I have figured out in this exchange. First, those who don't actually read critical race, but only listen to critiques of it by famous pastors or authors in other fields. Secondly, those who only know D'Angelo and Kendi and don't read Christian authors on race. 3, those who actually do read critical race research, but as critics and not as practitioners. And then fourthly, those of us who actually engage critical race research in order to employ it in our ministry and work. It makes so much sense now because I have been baffled by the reactionary, simplistic, and erroneous accusations and scare tactics. It has been fascinating to see some really predictable patterns emerge. CRT is a competing worldview with a different salvation, and therefore it is anti-Christ. So not only should we not listen to it, but we will be led astray from the truth. CRT is Marxist, although no one seems to be able to show me a single practitioner who employs Marx. Thirdly, that CRT bears bad fruits like family tension, conflict in congregations, and social strife. But let's admit, anytime you wake up to a new reality, there can be some disorientation and some whiplash. Fourthly, the Bible is often used as a barrier, and usually it's going to start with Galatians 3:28. It's quoted to say that we shouldn't focus on race because Jesus, not realizing that the ancient, the pre-modern conception of race is entirely different than our contemporary concern, and that those passages don't say that there's no such thing as race, but that the power of the gospel is to rupture our categorization and our man-made ways of grouping people. I actually use Galatians 3:28 in my critical race scholarship. And lastly, that CRT pits people and groups in adversarial tension with one group oppressing the other group. And yes, that is the theory of history that's being employed in critical race theory. It would be called a negative dialectic by those who employ such terms. It is clear to me now that the objections by my fellow Christians to critical race research is so predictable and sometimes sophomoric because they're not actually reading critical race. And the few who do are reading it as outsiders trying to poke holes in it. This also, by the way, explains why my first video in this series about why evangelicals cannot do critical race theory hit so close to home, and why the evangelical camp still has no one to put forward who employs critical race in their work. So here is my threefold proposal. Number one, put down D'Angelo and Kendi and read your fellow Christians talk about race. Number two, don't read non-practitioners' critiques before you read some actual CRT. And number three is the big one. Tell us who you're working off of. Who made the claim? Like if you're going to say it's Marxist, who are you working off of? What actual practitioner have you read that's doing this? I'll close by saying this. If you have time to read about critical race, then you have time to read some actual work of critical race. And if you don't want to do that, and I totally understand if you don't, I've said from day one that critical race is not for everybody. But if you don't want to do that, then you at least need to be reading Christian authors who deal with race. I hope that these suggestions have been helpful. Please let me know your concerns, your questions, your comments as we continue to have this conversation.